Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Budget Committee meeting for North Clackamas for April 15th. Um, Wanted to welcome everyone back and also wish everyone a happy tax day. Um, to start the agenda tonight, we have a review of the Budget Committee informational meeting notes from last time. The notes from the last meeting should be in your packet. And also, one thing to note, one of the questions or an observation that came up last time was there was an a correction that needed to be made on the enrollment chart from Flow. That has been updated and is the correct version is in the packet. Excellent eagle eye from Mitzi as always. So take a moment to review the meeting notes before we get into the presentations. Okay. Before we get into the first agenda item, I just wanted to remind us this is the second of 3 informational meetings. Today we'll be getting into a little more detail on some topics like our facilities update and a deeper dive on PERS. I'm pleased to be joined initially by our awesome Director of Fiscal Operations, Donna Burke. So first is an update. You may remember the financial forecast that I went over in our last meeting. So just wanted to provide an update on some things that we are aware of since the last time we spoke. Our assumptions right now are still using 11.36 billion is our estimate for the state school fund. That remains unchanged from what we presented before. The information that we are hearing kind of leads us to believe that that is still the current understanding. Also, in context of what we're looking at, and the other considerations, there is, of course, a lot of budgetary pressure at the state level. I'm sure everyone is aware that there has been a fair amount of uncertainty about about federal funding in a number of areas. For the state in particular, almost every activity that the state does has some kind of federal component involved with it. So the uncertainty that we are seeing in K-12 education is uncertainty that the state is feeling across almost all of their functions. With that said, there are some things being discussed that may prove beneficial, but are not certain now. So we're not certain that they will happen, and we're not certain if they do what what it would look like in the end. But there have been some discussions that the reimbursement percentage, the overall support for high cost disability may be raised. Also, that the special education cap, which is currently 11% of students, that may be lifted. To what level, still undetermined. There is also a possibility that there is some legislation from the state right now where there may be some potential mitigation of what we're looking at in PERS. But again, it's uncertain if it will happen, and very uncertain if it does happen, what it would look like. Another thing that we are looking at is just in addition to the recent uncertainty about federal funding is the possible inflationary impact of things like tariffs on our initial budget estimates. So that's something that we are very actively keeping an eye on. Also, just to kind of set the expectation about how the sequence of things will happen, the we will be proposing our budget on May 13th. Any of the changes that may happen that I discussed, like the high cost disability, special ed cap being raised, the potential PERS relief, all of that is unlikely to happen or be any more certain before the state revenue forecast on May 14th. So by that point, we will have, and even then, it would probably take a bit of time for that to actually become, to make its way and become part of the final budget. So what that means for us is that we are proceeding with our initial assumptions. Any of the changes that may come, there is still uncertainty. In the end, we've estimated 11.36. That could go up, that could go down. So we're definitely aware of that possibility. But most of the possible changes that we are looking at would be to our benefit. But again, the timing of those and the level of certainty that we have about those right now is that we won't be able to include any of that in our budget for the upcoming year. And then also, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions or anything along the way, please, I'd be happy to try and answer. Next is our local option levy report on that. So that was renewed by voters in the district in November 2023. Overwhelmingly so, it passed with over 70% support and passed with a majority in every precinct in the district, which was very gratifying for everyone involved. The levy went into effect for 5 years. Over that 5 years, we're expecting that it will generate about an average of about $25 million or so annually over the course of that. And again, we are very fortunate for the support of our community in having that levy. And what that helps us do is that supports our operations. And that means retaining approximately 180 teachers or so, being able to maintain our class sizes and being able to preserve the kind of programming like career, technical education, music, art, and physical education. And then also just wanted to mention something about other funds. And here, in the first meeting, Donna talked about kind of some of the details of some of the other funds that we have outside of the general fund. One thing that I wanted to mention is when we talk about federal funding, I wanted to put up here to kind of, so we could all understand what it is exactly that we are talking about. The information here is from our FY 23-24 audit. So these are actuals for the last full year that we have. Going forward for 25-26, some of this is obviously going to be different. The Educational Stabilization Fund, usually people think of that as ESSER. That's going away. The child nutrition is, there's kind of a different set of understandings around that. Looking forward with the kind of things that we're talking about, that when we hear about federal funding in public education like Title I, special education grants, looking forward, that we're talking about roughly $8.5 million looking forward. It's a little different here because these are the actuals from before. But just putting this here so that we have kind of a common understanding of what it is that we're talking about when we mention federal funds. So if there are no questions on anything so far, we will move on to the facilities update. Thank you, Donna. So I'm pleased to be joined by our esteemed Chief of Operations, Teresa Neffenster.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. And traditionally, this is the time when we would be talking through what our progress to date on bond projects would be and our status of all the projects. We've finished all the projects from 2016. So tonight I'm going to walk us through our process for assessing where we are with our assets, determining what categories we're thinking about when we're thinking about the next cycle of the bond. So I'll start off talking about the cycle that we go through. So we have three areas that we look at when it's in terms of cycle of capital construction bonds. So the first phase is the analysis of systems, looking at all of our assets, how are different functions running in our buildings, and creating a list of needs across the district and categories that we want to define for our community of how we want to think about going for the bond. The second phase is once we go through the bond process and secure funding, we determine the project timeline for all the projects that have been approved, and then we create a project tracker essentially. And then the third phase is the implementation of all of the projects and overseeing the milestones of those. And traditionally, North Clackamas has followed a 10-year cycle for these phases. So 2006, 2016, and now that we're in 2025, we're actually in the first phase, which is looking at where we are in our spaces, what are the assets in our buildings that need to be addressed, what are the categories that are rising to the top that we're looking for recommending to our superintendent's board bond advisory committee. And so what does that mean? How do we do this assessment? How do we sort out what categories we want to kind of think about moving forward? There's a few steps to the process. So during the 2016 bond, there was a facilities condition assessment done in the district. And what that means is that outside vendors came in and looked at every asset in our building. And assets are things like our boilers, our HVAC systems, our windows, our doors, camera systems, etc. And they rated their useful life. Are they in good condition? Are they in poor condition? Are they in failing condition? And for each building in the district, they created what is called a long-term facilities plan for each building of what needs to be addressed in what prioritized space. And then collectively, they were able to take all of that information and give us a recommendation of what we should be doing moving forward with all of the assets in our district. So that was done and completed and published in 2023. So one of the things that we need to then do is make this data real time. So we also invested this year in Incident IQ work system, which is a system that our facilities team uses for all of the repairs that they do and all the replacements of assets. So we're taking the data from the facilities condition assessment and we're pairing it real time with work that's getting done in our Incident IQ work order system. So separate to that, we had also had internal review of all of our safety mechanisms in the district, all of our safety items such as cameras, doors, etc. And we also had an external evaluation in regards to how we are looking at our job hazard analysis, things that are in need of review and repair from an OSHA standpoint as well. So we've taken our facilities assessments, we've taken our safety assessments, and we have taken all of those recommendations and created a prioritized list of everything that needs to be addressed in the district from all of these assessments. And then we took that list and we prioritized it based on 4 phases. So there's the critical priority, which is those assets that are either failing or need to be addressed very quickly, or they will be failing. Priority 1 is essential upgrades to meet code. So they're not failing, but they're essential updates that need to occur. And then priority 2 and priority 3 are looking at lower priority improvements. So we've done our assessments. We then created a list based on those recommendations, and then we prioritized that list. Then we looked at that prioritized list and found categories that rose to the top based on everything that was coming together. So we found 5 categories that we are recommending moving forward with when it comes to thinking about the next bond, which I'll go over in the next slides. Go over both the 5 categories and then each category individually, what that category means, and how we're thinking about the theme of the next bond potentially. So when we're looking at the list that I mentioned and categorizing, we looked at just the critical and priority 1 categories. So those categories where we are most in need of addressing concerns. And we really honed in on the idea that in 2006 and 2016, we were about building new spaces and doing major renovations. And now as fiscal stewards, it is our responsibility to create an infrastructure space where we're maintaining those investments. So really thinking about infrastructure stewardship as our theme moving forward. So the 5 categories that we have determined to move forward with are safety and security, roof systems, technology infrastructure, ventilation thermal comfort systems, and critical maintenance. So breaking that down into each category, when we're thinking about safety measures that we want to review and think about investing more in, is really reviewing our camera systems, making sure that they are all in a standard space that is not only to today's standards, but moving into what new technology exists within camera systems to make them more effective and efficient for us. Thinking about communication systems, one of the pieces of feedback that we consistently get are that it's very difficult based on certain spaces in our buildings for staff to communicate with one another. So looking at how we can support our staff in day-to-day communications, but also feeding into our emergency management communication protocol. And then mapping for emergency response scenarios, ensuring that we have digitized and up-to-date mapping for both our internal protocols, but also partnering with our emergency response partners. The next category was the roof systems, and this would be addressing roof systems in need of complete replacement and or critical repair. So not patching, but complete rebuilds of roofs or significant repairs of the roof systems. And then thinking about ventilation and thermal comfort, what this really is looking at is 2 separate things. One is updating heating, ventilation, and chiller systems in buildings that do not have HVAC. So to be very clear, this isn't saying putting HVAC in our buildings that currently do not have HVAC. Most of those buildings do not have the infrastructure to actually plop HVAC into them. It's a technical term, plop. But what we do have the ability to do is to do evaluations for every building to determine how we can create chilled spaces in our education spaces and also heating our spaces that are in need of heating as well. And so that will go to be determined by the actual space of the building itself. One option that we do have that we're thinking through with some of the buildings are things like a split unit, which is you may be familiar with in non-commercial spaces, where it's a unit on a wall that's not an HVAC system, but it circulates the air and chills the air so it can make a space thermally comfortable for everybody in it. So really reviewing how we can best address thermal comfort needs for all of our buildings. And then the buildings that are HVAC, it would mean looking and ensuring that we are keeping those units at the level that they need to be so that we keep them in good order versus any other issues that may occur. Yes.
On the issue of ventilation and thermal comfort systems, I'm curious about, is the objective there also to allow for utilization of the properties during high heat events like we had in the past?
That's exactly correct. It's making sure that we create a space that our all of our buildings are actually being able to be used year round, no matter how hot it is or how cold it is. So absolutely addressing that, and also looking at making sure that we are addressing airflow, making sure that we're ensuring that we keep the quality of the air in a positive space year round as well. The buildings that do not currently have HVAC do not have the infrastructure to have HVAC, but we will be looking at all of the buildings, creating a chilled space for them. You're welcome. Okay. Yep.
How many of our buildings currently have HVAC and also have AC in classrooms versus how many buildings are on old boiler systems that can't accommodate an HVAC?
It's a great question, and it's a very nuanced answer. So I would like to send you a document that actually breaks it all down, because it's not a one sentence answer, but I would happily provide that as a next step for sure around what buildings have exactly what systems and how we are looking to address them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to technology infrastructure, and this category is very much tied to all the other categories. So systems in general in our current day and moving forward rely heavily on technology infrastructure to run, and that is something that we need to consider when it comes to all of our safety systems, all of the ventilation systems, and a lot of our systems are now running on the need for stronger infrastructure needs with our technology. So what we're looking at from a technology infrastructure perspective is not only maintaining what we have, but laying down cables, etc., infrastructure so that we can use systems appropriately. The most accessible example I can provide is if we are moving forward with communication systems so that our staff can work more seamlessly together. Currently, we would be able to do that in our buildings. We would not be able to do that in our fields, in our playgrounds, because we do not have Wi-Fi or any accessibility in those outside spaces. So an example of one technology infrastructure we would be looking at is laying down the wiring and cabling and understanding, getting that infrastructure so that we could do that along with other things. That's just one example of technology infrastructure that we would be looking to invest in. Yep.
Do all of our, I almost said clinics, do all of our schools have infrastructure at the front door locking system where there's a buzz in, or are all of them updated to that now?
Yeah, that was part of the 2016 fund.
Thank you. And those are all completed?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. And then along with the infrastructure piece, I also want to name that one of the things we will be looking to continue to invest in, we've been investing and we would continue to invest in, our cybersecurity measures to ensure that we have everything in place to maintain our cyber safety of all of our students and staff. And then our final category would be critical maintenance. And this is a category that actually lives in every bond. We just name that it's there because this includes some strong, very large capital projects that are not falling easily into the other four categories. This would be a complete replacement of a plumbing system in a building or a complete replacement of a boiler system in a building. So those are some capital projects that do occur every bond. We just name that it's a separate category to the other ones. So we've done the assessments, we've created the list, we've created the categories, and we are also bringing this information to the community to talk about what we've been doing and get their feedback. So I'll talk through a little bit about our forums now. We started in March at our community conversations. where we started talking about everything I just talked about, as well as some space analysis work that we're doing in the district. So in April 30th, we'll have our next facility forum, which will be focused on really drilling down in how we pay for facilities work at the district level, because it's nuanced, and I think a lot of very well-intentioned folks are just saying, well, just go do it now. And we want to kind of walk through how we pay for things. That's going to happen in April 30th. Then in May, we'll have a facility forum that's going to be talking through our capacity, our space capacity work that we've been doing, as well as our safety measures that we're recommending moving forward with. In August, we'll have a facility forum that talks through the actual facilities infrastructure and the needs there. And then fall of 2025, we will convene the Superintendent's Bond Advisory Committee and do the community outreach in winter and spring. And that Bond Advisory Committee will be the committee that will bring the recommendation forward on the future bond. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your time and hand it back to Matt.
Thank you, Teresa.
I have a quick question.
Oh.
Sorry. From your timeline, would that mean then potentially a bond measure on the fall 2026 November?
That will be the
Ballot.
determination of the Bond Advisory Committee as a recommendation, but that is our recommendation of moving forward.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, as promised from the last meeting, tonight we have an update on PERS. I am very pleased to be joined by Carol Samuels. Carol is the Managing Director of Public Finance at Piper Sandler. She has 35 years of experience working with public agencies throughout Oregon. And I can say definitively that within the world of public finance in Oregon, she is someone who has pretty much universal respect amongst that group.
I didn't pay him, but
And in particular, so she has provided wise counsel to a lot of places throughout the state throughout the years on all manner of public finance. But with the subject that we're discussing tonight, PERS, she is one of the most knowledgeable people in the state on that subject. So I'm very pleased to be joined by her tonight. I'm a little nervous that I'm going to be talking about the same subject at the same time. So tonight we'll have a presentation. I'll start out talking about some things that are kind of specific to us, and then I'll hand it over to Carol, who will speak with much more knowledge on the larger, the bigger picture. Before we get started on the presentation, though, I do want to kind of level set a little bit. This presentation is informational in nature. This is an informational meeting, so we've got an informational presentation. There's no action that the budget committee would be taking now or that the board would be taking. But looking ahead to next year in this biennium, PERS is going to be the probably the single biggest point of stress on our budget. So we wanted to give this subject the deep dive and the due diligence it deserved. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'll start out, everyone knows that PERS is going up. Well, the question is, why is PERS going up? Well, our rate's increased. Well, why is our rate increased? So what I have here is, you can see the things, there's a lot of information on this table, but a couple things that are really important. In the bottom, you see the components that make up our PERS rate for both Tier 1, Tier 2, and OPSRP, the different levels of PERS. And then you see the numbers for the 25-27 biennium. So as you can see, there are a lot of different components that make up the PERS rate. We're not going to go into detail on all of them because, as I've highlighted, you can see that of the increase that we are seeing from one biennium to the next, roughly 80% of that difference is in the level of rate relief that we see from our side accounts. So then the next logical question would be, okay, what are side accounts? So side accounts are extra deposits that we or other public agencies make to dedicated individual PERS funds. That's money that's given to the state, to the PERS fund, to be invested alongside all the other funds that they hold and invest. The rate relief that we see is generally drawn down over about a period of about 20-25 years, and it lowers our expenses through a rate credit. That's what you saw, the side account rate relief. The credits that we see are adjusted with each biennium. That's why we saw the bigger one before and adjusted with the lower amount this time. It's spent down, since you deposited it once, it's spent down over time. And as your payroll grows, that's one of the things that can lead to the side accounts being spent down or depleted faster. You can fund a side account with either cash or bonds, but to really see a large enough rate relief to really make a really significant difference, you're talking about an amount of cash that you can pretty much only generate through a bond or some other large financing like that. So if you take out a bond that's spent down over time, eventually the district will no longer see rate relief, but around the same time, you should also see the debt service that you're paying on that bond go away. And I'll have a graphic that shows that in a little bit more detail. So that's kind of what side accounts are. How do they work? Well, if you are fortunate enough and to have everything line up correctly, they can be a tremendous benefit to a public agency. In our case, since 2004, North Clackamas has saved approximately $87 million as a result of our side account since 2004. It's a pretty significant number, and one that kind of like over the scale of time, it's really hard to like think about but just what a tremendous impact that is. But it's safe to say that the district would be a much different place over that span of time if not for this. So when you are considering a side account, the concept is that since you're borrowing, you want the rate that you're borrowing to be low enough so that the returns that on the investment exceed the rate that you've borrowed at. If you're able to do that, you save money. If not, you can lose money. The outcome is not certain, so there is definite risk. And there are examples of agencies that have lost money through taking out a side account. As we are here right now, at this point in time, if it were something today, the market conditions are not favorable for a pension bond. So at this moment, it wouldn't be advisable. That may change, and we've made sure that we are going to be at the table for any kind of discussion or analysis on a pension bond going forward. So I mentioned how a district would save money on a pension bond, and I think this table does a good job of illustrating it. So you can see that blue line represents how much money we have saved in a calendar year as a result of the rate relief. The green line represents the amount of debt service we've had to pay as a result of the pension bond. So that space in between the blue line and the green line, that represents about $87 million worth of savings to date. Now that the pension bond and the side accounts are winding down, we've reached a point where over the next couple years, not yet, but very soon, we'll have a brief window where we are paying more in debt service than we're realizing in rate relief. We have known the level of rate relief has been over the next couple years is a bit less than we were expecting, but the fact that it was going down is expected. So we've kind of put some plans in place for things that we can do to mitigate against this impact. What that means for the upcoming year, this is a table that shows the expected impact over, well, it shows the last two bienniums and the biennium that is coming up. And we are expecting that the additional cost for PERS over each of the 2 years of the biennium is about $13 million. We are, as I mentioned before, there's SB 489. There's a possibility that there may be some potential rate relief. I'm somewhat optimistic that it may happen, but what it would look like and how much that would mean is far from certain right now and not something that we could reasonably include in our budget. There are some things that may be options going forward. There is an employer incentive fund where if you deposit $10 million or more with the state, you may get a 25% match. That's something that we have considered. There are some restrictions that apply to that. But as I mentioned before, we have known that we are going to see reduced rate relief from PERS, so we have put in place some things that may potentially mitigate that. So if there,
I may.
yeah, absolutely.
One clarification, the employer incentive fund is available.
Can you turn your mic on?
How's now? Can you hear me? Okay. The thumb makes things awkward. Apologies. What I was going to say is that the 25% state match is actually available for smaller deposits than 10 million, but the less you deposit, the less the match will be. So we can talk more about that.
So with that, I will.
I have a question.
Oh.
So this topic really makes me mad. So Carol, correct me if I'm have my facts incorrect. So on our side accounts, we don't get to choose which fund those are invested in, right? It's a PERS decision. So rate of return for 2024 PERS was 0.6%. So anything directionally south of 8% then means we're upside down. What's happening? Is it the investment policy at PERS that's causing this? Because my grandchild could have invested and earned more than 0.6% in 2024.
So a couple of clarifications for the benefit of everybody. Over time, PERS invests all deposits they receive, both side accounts, but also the ongoing expenses that school districts, cities, counties, state agencies send for purposes of providing funds sufficient to pay the benefits when your employees retire. They invest that in a wide variety of assets. To be clear, it's not PERS that manages the investments, it's the state treasurer. But what they attempt to do is meet their assumption known as the assumed earnings rate. One clarification, the assumed earnings rate for decades was set at 8%. You're right. In more recent years, most pension systems, including Oregon's pension system, determined that that rate of return as an assumption was arguably overly optimistic. So they have gradually brought it down. It is now set at 6.9%. And what it reflects is the board's best estimate in consultation with investment advisors and with their actuary of what a reasonable long-term rate of return will be. Historically, PERS has surpassed the assumed rate. Recently, that has not been true. And there have been many conversations because they have not hit the assumed rate now for 3 years in a row. That's a problem if it continues, because every time they don't earn their assumed rate, it causes your payroll costs to go up, because the benefits that are owed to your retirees are fixed. And if the funds don't come from investment earnings, there's really only one place to go, and that's to employers. So I hear your frustration. I shared your frustration, particularly in the past year. Largely because the fund actually only earned 5.7% last year. That is when lots of other investments were doing much better than that. There was a presentation at the last PERS board meeting by the chief investment officer for the state treasurer, who walked through an explanation of why the fund had not performed as well as the rest of the market. And you've probably all heard about the, what do they call it, the Magic 7 stocks that last year, including stocks associated with AI and high tech, NVIDIA as the poster child, that caused the S&P 500 to significantly outperform. For good or for ill, the PERS portfolio is much more diversified than those 7 stocks. However, I would say this is definitely something that employers generally should be paying attention to, because as I said before, anytime the fund does not meet its assumption, it means potentially higher costs down the road, unless those are offset this year, next year, etc., by earning more than the assumed rate. So I went on way longer than you probably wanted, but I think it's a legitimate concern that the fund has not been earning as much as it has historically.
Would you like the
Sure. Do you have a question?
What's the second largest increase? Was it tier one?
Whoops.
Oh, yeah.
I just,
There.
Yeah. So
let's see, where is it?
you can see the between tier one, tier two, and OPSRP, that's about 7.88%, and 6.22% of that is made up in the difference in side account rate relief. There's also the normal cost rate and the OPSRP UAL rate. There's about a 1% increase in there. Those are fairly, I think if you look back historically, you're probably going to see pretty similar biennium over biennium growth in that. So those are I would categorize as unremarkable.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about pension bonds, which is how I got introduced to the whole subject of pensions. As Matt was saying, a pension bond is a pretty unique kind of borrowing. It's very different from the bond that Teresa was talking about, perhaps going to the voters for. That's for capital projects, for facilities. A pension bond is one that you enter into with a hope of reducing your operating costs. So it's much more like an operating effort. And as Matt was saying, the key headline, the soundbite about whether or not it's going to be successful is if you can borrow at a given rate, say 5% would be about the current rate, send that money to PERS, have PERS invest that fund over a long period of time and earn more than 5%, right? It is a bet. Let's call a spade a spade. It is not like a facilities bond. It's one that you cannot guarantee the outcome. So there are risks. Moreover, it is not as simple as saying, if I borrow at 5 and earn 6, I've reduced my costs, because timing also matters. Matt referenced the fact that most jurisdictions who have entered into pension bonds in Oregon have done well. And that helps me sleep at night, because there were a group, about 6 school districts in the fall of 2007. Anyone remember what happened in 2008? So they borrowed in the fall of 2007, and almost immediately, within 3 months, the market fell off a cliff. They lost 30% of their deposit, and they still have not recovered, nearly 20 years later. So it's not something you do lightly. There's a lot of research that has to go into it, a lot of analysis that has to go into it. And one of the pieces that is now required, but was always a prudent thing to do, was to have the district retain a third-party economics firm to do what some people refer to, get this, as a Monte Carlo simulation. Why? Because this is a bet. The more official name for it is a stochastic model that basically gives you the probability of, if I borrow at this rate, what are the odds that I'm actually going to put the district in better shape than if I do nothing. Past assessments by Echo Northwest that did all of them suggested that if you could borrow at 4.5%, the odds were roughly 74% that you would make money on this bet. Right now, I'm sure you've all noticed that the market is in some degree of turmoil. I still think the current rate is 4.9 to 5%, but they haven't run an assessment, a probability assessment, in 3 years. So relying on their old assessment that said you had a 3 in 4 chance of this working out would not be prudent, and you would need to update that assessment prior to doing any borrowing. And by the way, don't hesitate to interrupt me as I go. This is kind of silly.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here.
Yes.
So the pension bond rates, what are those tied to? Is that interest rates or is that treasury bond rates?
Well,
Or something else, I
it's
guess.
an excellent question. So it is an interest rate we're talking about, and it's a municipal interest rate. So it's not a treasury interest rate, but the treasury market, which a lot of people have been talking about in the past week because they're realizing how crucial it is the baseline against which all other interest rates are set. So you as a municipality, as a school district, could borrow, but your borrowing rate is going to be a spread to whatever the treasury rate would be. Okay? That's why treasury rates right now, 20-year treasury rates, are not at 4.9%. Your rate would be at 4.9% because, at least in normal times, your borrowing is considered riskier than the federal government's borrowing. Okay? We are in kind of uncharted territory right now. There are bonds that have been sold in the past week. They all have carried higher interest rates than where it would have been 2 weeks ago. So a lot of what's been going on with national headlines is something that definitely would have to settle down before you even considered going this direction. But I am reasonably comfortable in saying that the rate would not be higher than, say, 5.25% today. Okay. Okay. Did I talk about this? No. So, when you borrow, you are sending the money to a side account, and that side account, as Matt said, generates a credit that is given to you for a biennium while that money is being invested. So they fix the credit for the biennium based upon an assumption of what the rate of return is going to be. And 2 years later, at the end of the biennium, what they do is they look back and they say, oh, how did that investment do? Well, if it earned less than what they were assuming, your credit in the next biennium will be lower. Of course, the opposite is true as well. And the graph that Matt showed you, which showed the degree of savings, showed how well the investments were generally doing. But one feature of a pension bond that you just have to get used to, and I'm so grateful to hear that North Clackamas has built reserves. Not every district has, but it does increase the volatility. You may save money, but in the years where investments don't do well, the fact that you saved money 2 years ago isn't going to feel really good unless you build adequate reserves to take you through the hard times as well as the good times. When you do a pension bond, one of the key steps, as I mentioned before, is to hire a third party to do an assessment. You also have to go through a lengthy process with PERS to get them to run analyses. So the whole borrowing process takes a long time. The assessment itself takes about 2 to 3 months to complete, but the borrowing can take 9 to 12 months. So you want to make sure you do the assessment at kind of the right time, because you might do an assessment and then 7 months later you want to go in the market and the market is either in better or worse shape. You don't want to have spent the money on an assessment if you think that the outcome is not going to be favorable. On the other hand, if you think there is a chance it might be favorable, arguably you want to get it done, because that is the key step before you can go down this year-long path. So it means every time I've worked on a pension bond, and I've worked on all of them, it gives me a headache just thinking about all the pieces that have to fit together. So, there are districts, particularly since most of the side accounts that were created in the early 2000s are all expiring at the same time. That's one of the reasons, as Matt showed you, that your rates are going up, because the side account is scheduled. It's doing what it was intended to do, goes away, rates are going up. A lot of school districts have said, wait, can we get a new one? And I will share what I've said to all of them, which is maybe, but you don't want to get a new side account just because your old one is going away. The economics have to be right. And having lived with school districts who borrowed in 2007, I am very humble about this. We've had way more districts, like 100, who have saved money to the 7 who didn't, but those 7 do give me some stress that this has got to be the right decision made with your eyes wide open about how it can go wrong. So, but I keep going the wrong way. Okay, so I reference this. I'm not going to go over every line, but as I say, there are many additional steps that are important given the risk of doing a pension bond. So you need to have the statistical assessment. You need to engage in multiple documents with lawyers who enjoy drafting complicated documents. One of the pieces of a pension bond that is also unusual is, unlike with your general obligation bonds that you issued on your own, most of the school district issues have been done in a pool. That pool allows you to have economies of scale because you're all going at the same time, but it also complicates the issuance, and there are additional documents associated with that. So As I said, you also have to ask PERS to run an actuarial analysis of how much they will reduce your rate if you send them a certain amount of money. That does add time, but it also means that you can get an immediate rate credit the month after you send them the money. So it can be a very helpful tool if the circumstances are correct. We've talked about the statistical analysis. Again, it's now required. Not only is it required that you have one prepared, but you have to issue it in a public report, and then you have to send it to the state treasurer. The good news about the assessment, however, is that it is the same assessment for everybody. The ingredients don't differ just because you're a school district over here or a city over there, or frankly a state agency down in Salem. The specifics are the same. What are the odds that if you borrow at X rate, the investments within the PERS portfolio are going to return a higher return? So historically, Echo Northwest has been willing to do a single assessment for a broad-based pool of jurisdictions, which has really brought down the cost. This cost here, I think, is a little on the low side, given certain things I haven't shared with you. I am thinking the overall cost would be somewhere around $50,000, but historically, there have been somewhere between 30 and 50 jurisdictions who have signed up simultaneously. OASBO has indicated, the School Business Officials Organization has indicated that they are willing to coordinate the process with Echo Northwest and then provide a cost. My sense is it would be under $5,000, if not substantially under $5,000, depending on how many end up signing up. The tentative schedule that was thrown into a little bit of disarray in the past week or two was that Echo Northwest was going to monitor the asset allocation of the PERS fund this spring. There are joint meetings of the Treasury and the PERS board where they will be discussing the asset allocation. That will be in early May. And the thought was, depending on their instincts about how this might turn out, we would try to have the assessment done by July, such that the results could be presented at the OASBO annual meeting at the end of July, as well as a subsequent meeting in Salem. So there would be 2 presentations of the results. We are actually hot off the presses having a meeting tomorrow with OASBO and with Echo Northwest to see whether or not that is still something we want to pursue. I will say that no decision will be made on your behalf. If you are interested, there will be an opportunity to sign up, assuming it still looks prudent to pursue it at this time. The assessment itself is about 25 pages long, but I'd like to show this one slide from their PowerPoint presentation because I think this is the main takeaway. So what you're seeing is a slide from the most recent assessment that was prepared in 2022. And at the bottom on the x-axis, you see the initials TIC and then 3 different interest rates. TIC is my industry's lingo for the borrowing rate. It stands for true interest cost. It's basically the blended borrowing rate. Well, way back in 2022, 2.5% was still in the realm of the possible. I would say don't count on seeing that again anytime soon. Frankly, I'm not thinking 3.5% is very likely in the next year, but 4.5% might be. And then on the y-axis and at the top of the bars, you can see the probability of this being a positive thing to do. Well, of course, if you can borrow at 2.5%, your odds are pretty darn good, 91%. 3.5%, about 84%, and so on. If we were to do this right now, my sense is we would probably ask Echo Northwest to run another 3 assessments, take off the 2.5, and add 5.5 as a borrowing rate. So, OASBO did send out a survey about, 3 months ago, saying, hey, we're thinking about maybe going in for a pooled assessment. Would you be interested? They sent it to all school districts, they sent it to all community colleges, and they sent it to cities and counties as well. And they got very robust response that, yeah, I might be interested in this. Again, that was kind of in a different market. So we've talked about most of this. If we proceed, then there will be presentations in July and early August, accompanied by analyses that we provide of what you might save or not under different borrowing rate and investment rate assumptions. So, I have probably taken way more time than you wanted, but I'm available for questions if I haven't bored you all.
So just to clarify, you said next week the PERS board and state treasurer is going to talk about their asset allocation
In May.
in May.
Yeah.
Because I've heard they're doubling down on their investment policy, and so that's going to be problematic. So it'll be interesting to see what E&W says. I mean, we lobby all day long for more money for schools, for classrooms. I don't see us doing a lot lobbying the PERS board and state treasurer, who miss forecast after forecast after forecast after forecast. So is there space in the room for us to lobby at the state level for PERS board, treasurer, asset allocation, investment policy as a school district?
I would say that there's always room to lobby. The PERS board is not the logical target, even though they administer the system. It's really the state treasurer.
But who approves the investment policy? Is it the PERS board or is it the treasurer?
It's an entity that's a subsidiary of the Treasury called the Oregon Investment Council.
Okay. Great, thanks.
And their meetings are posted, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One quick question. So you talked about the 10 million with the 25% rebate. Is that separate than side accounts? Okay, that's what I thought.
It is a side account,
Okay.
but it's a side account. So the state has this program where they will match cash deposits only, not bond funded deposits, and up to 25% of the deposit, first come, first served. They have a new round that started April 1st that has $40 million in it for this purpose. I don't think that's going to last super long, but I would say it is something that, so North Clackamas won't be eligible until July. They have a prioritized group for the April to July period, but I would say if you have funds available, it might be something worth looking at.
This might be a little bit of a common or simple question, but I'm curious if there's any other structures to provide that type of relief other than side accounts which require a transfer to PERS.
So theoretically, you could set up your own investment account and not send it to PERS. The problem is that how municipalities can invest funds is much more constrained than how a pension can invest funds. So the PERS portfolio is roughly $80 billion, and they invest in bonds, and they invest in stocks, and they invest in equities, special equities, and commodities, and real estate. You as a school district can invest in bonds, and only a limited number of bonds. So in some environments, the past year, the local government investment pool was returning almost as much as the PERS fund. But in other years, the PERS fund in 2021 returned 20%. So you get to keep control of the money if you invest it, but over the long haul, the odds that you will do better with your investments than they will is pretty remote.
Thank you, Carol. To that point, our investment policy has preservation of capital as the foremost consideration. In order to see the larger returns, there also is an element of risk that comes along with that, being willing to take on investment opportunities that are a little riskier than the kinds of investments that we have at our disposal. So over, kind of like Carol was saying, over time, I think it's unlikely that the rate of returns that you would see would exceed the amount of debt service that you would have to pay. All right, well, if there are no further questions, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Carol. You're welcome. That is it for the evening. If there are any questions,
Matt, I have a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just going back to the beginning of what you were talking about as far as the projection of federal funding, you mentioned it was roughly half of what the district, you said it was going forward $8.5 million in federal funding is.
That's the about the what we would have from the Department of Education.
Okay. I guess my question is that list of programs, are there any programs on that list that are, in this next budget going to be cut significantly or altogether?
That's the uncertainty. The information, there's certainly a lot going on. The most recent information we have is that we're not. I'm trying to answer the question in a way that is authoritative and honest, but not. As I mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty. We haven't been told or have no specific reason to believe that there is X amount of dollars that we have been told that we are not going to get. But as we have seen, there is things can change in a hurry. So we need to have contingency. We are moving forward with the assumption that that we are going to get what we are told that we would be getting, but we certainly have to have contingency plans in place in the event that that does not come to pass. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple. Sorry.
Yeah.
First one is if everything stays as normal, which is probably a hope and a prayer at this point, but if everything stayed as normal, are our Title I funds pretty stable, or do we have change in our demographics that we would be losing Title I funding?
I really, I would not want to, beyond saying that we are preparing a budget under the assumption that we will have those funds. I would not want to say anything beyond that gave much confidence or doubt about whether or not what will happen in the upcoming year.
So let me rephrase. Have we had significant changes in our demographics that would eliminate our school's ability to qualify for previous Title I funding? For instance, like Title I funding is based on our poverty rates and among other things, but have we had any shifts in our demographics that make it so that, no, I'm looking at Shay. Okay, thank you.
No.
Sorry. And now I forgot my next question. So if it comes back, I'll let you know.
If you think of it later, let me know. I'd be happy to try and
Thank you.
answer whatever questions.
Oh, okay. Here it is. With the federal government sending out the memo or letter and asking all the school districts to sign the DEI letter, and ODE's instructions for everyone to not sign the DEI letter, are there plans at the state level to backfill that federal funding should the federal government decide to not fund Oregon schools?
To answer that, I would call back to what I mentioned earlier, that the uncertainty about federal funding is being seen in every category, essentially, of where the federal government is involved. So the uncertainty that the state is seeing isn't limited to public education. It is affecting mental health, housing, transportation. So, which is a long way of saying that I would not expect I would not plan on the state having the ability to do that. Because as I mentioned, the uncertainty is not just limited to education. It is something that the state is feeling across all the services that they offer.
Okay, and then last question, how much of the federal budget, like the 8 million, what percentage of that is our overall district budget?
In terms of, off the top of my head, our total district budget, all funds, is in the neighborhood of about 500 million in terms of like what's operating and capital and debt service, but that's encompassing everything.
Okay, I really promise this is the last one. So if we're looking at the 8 million compared to just our operating funds and not the bond funds, it's still a small portion of our overall budget. I'm not saying 8 million wouldn't hurt, but it's not going to sink the district, right?
Well, it is. Yeah. The district will continue to meet our mission, but a reduction of that amount would be felt and have real consequences. I hope that answers the question without without providing too much equivocation.
Thank you.
I think to add to that, we would have to make choices about what portions of the 8 million that we would backfill and which portions that we would not backfill of that. So
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, as I mentioned, this is the second of 3 informational meetings. The first 2 have been very focused on finance. That's what we do in order to support the educators of this district. We are fortunate to have a really outstanding group of educational leaders, and our next informational meeting is when we'll have an opportunity to hear them present. That's always the meeting that everyone looks forward to the most, so be sure to be here.
Just a logistical question. When will the binders are the next meeting or the meeting after that where we get like the actual
The
budget?
binders are when we have our proposed budget.
Okay.
So
So
that
not
will-
next meeting, it'll be the
No,
one after.
the next meeting is informational. So the next meeting is on April 29th, 2 weeks from today. The first formal meeting of the Budget Committee, when the budget will be proposed, is on May 13th.
Okay.
So that's when you would get the
Actual
copy
book.
of the proposed budget.
And then is it possible to see the slides in advance? Some of the PERS, I mean, I just felt like I was like swimming a little bit. And so it'd be helpful just to see it in advance to be able to process a little bit faster.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation and thank you for bringing Carol to the meeting. I learned more, and that 0.6% that I heard was a headline that was not accurate. It was 5.5 that she corrected me, and I knew that, so that was great to hear. So I really appreciate you doing that, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I will pass that along. Thank you. So yes, as I mentioned, next meeting is when we get to hear from our educational leaders. So be sure to be here on time with your popcorn ready. And with that, I will adjourn us for the evening. Thank you. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, again, I've mentioned this before, but we appreciate that our time is a precious resource for everyone. Everyone on the budget committee is here as a volunteer. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Good evening.
Thank you.